There's one thing I know about storms. They don't ask for permission before they arrive. They don't send a text message to let you know, "Get ready, I'm coming." No, they just show up uninvited, unexpected, and unapologetic. And when they do, they rattle everything that isn't anchored. Storms will shake your confidence. They will test your relationships. They will press on your faith. And if you're not rooted, if you're not grounded, if you're not anchored, storms will take you under. But here's the good news: you can be steady in the storm. When the disciples were on that boat, tossing back and forth in the winds and waves, fear grabbed them by the throat. They thought it was the end. But Jesus was sleeping, not because he didn't care, but because he was never shaken by what shook them. And when he stood and said, "Peace, be still," the storm had no choice but to obey. Listen to me, if creation has to respond to the voice of its creator, then the storm in your life does too. Now, don't misunderstand. Being steady doesn't mean the winds stop blowing. It doesn't mean the lightning quits flashing. It doesn't mean the thunder grows silent. Being steady means that while the storm is raging around you, it does not get to rage within you. It means that your faith stands taller than your fear. It means that your hope refuses to bow to despair. It means you can look at the chaos and still declare, "My God is able." Let me tell you something. Storms are not just obstacles. They are opportunities. Every storm that comes into your life is either sent by God, allowed by God, or used by God. And if he's letting you walk through it, it's because he plans to reveal himself in it. The storm is not the end of your story. It's the stage for his glory. So if you're in a storm tonight, don't let it dictate your posture. Lift up your head, straighten your back, steady your heart, because storms don't last forever. But the one who commands the storm, he does. And when the waves settle and the clouds part, you'll discover that you didn't just survive the storm. You came out stronger, steadier, and standing firmer in faith than ever before. So be steady in the storm, because your anchor holds. There's one thing we all know about storms. They never ask for permission before they arrive. They don't come knocking on your door saying, "May I come in?" They don't send you a polite reminder to prepare yourself. Storms don't give you a 3-day forecast to get your house in order. No, storms show up uninvited, unexpected, and unapologetic. They invade your life when you least expect them and rattle everything that isn't tied down. They don't care about your plans, your schedule, your calendar, or your dreams. They don't wait until you are strong enough to handle them. They show up in the midnight hour, in the middle of your weakness, and they make sure you feel the shaking. Storms will test you. They will press against the very foundation of your life. They will question whether what you say you believe is really what you stand on. They will whisper doubts into your ear and roar fear into your heart. Storms will try to convince you that you are powerless, that you are hopeless, that you are helpless. And if you are not anchored, if your faith is shallow, if your hope is fragile, if your trust is shaky, storms will take you under before you realize what's happening. Think about it. Storms never come when it's convenient. They never come when you feel rested and ready. They come in the middle of exhaustion. They come after the doctor's report. They come when the bank account is empty. They come when the relationship is hanging by a thread. They come when you've already been stretched so thin you don't think you can take one more thing. And then, here it is, the storm comes anyway. And when it comes, it rattles the windows of your soul and beats against the door of your faith. Storms will always expose what's inside of you. If there's fear, it will rise to the surface. If there's faith, it will be revealed. If there's bitterness, it will pour out. If there's hope, it will shine brighter than ever before. The storm doesn't create what's in you. It simply uncovers it. It pulls back the curtain and shows you whether your foundation is built on sand or on rock. And that revelation is often more uncomfortable than the storm itself, because storms not only disrupt your environment, they confront your spirit. But let me tell you something about storms. They don't just show you your weakness, they also give you the chance to discover God's strength. You may not know the power of peace until you've been in the chaos of a storm. You may not know the depth of God's provision until you've stood in the middle of lack. You may not know the reality of His presence until you've walked through the loneliness of the storm. Storms aren't polite, but they are purposeful. They arrive without invitation, but they never arrive without intention. When the winds rise and the waves crash, you discover what matters most. Suddenly the things you thought were important fade into the background. The shallow distractions, the fleeting comforts, the temporary props, they can't stand in the storm. They get blown away, and what's left is what's eternal, what's unshakable, what's real. Storms clear the clutter, so you can see what's truly holding you together. And so, when a storm breaks into your life, don't be surprised if you feel shaken. Don't be surprised if you feel stretched. Don't be surprised if the ground beneath you feels uncertain. That's what storms do. They don't play fair. They don't ask nicely. They don't wait until you're ready. They come crashing in. But in their crashing, they reveal where you're planted, what you're standing on, and who you're depending on. When the disciples found themselves in that boat, they weren't out there on a luxury cruise. They weren't basking in calm waters under a perfect sunset. They were in the middle of a storm that threatened to tear everything apart. The winds were howling, the waves were crashing, the boat was rocking violently, and fear gripped them so tight they could hardly breathe. Seasoned fishermen, men who had spent their lives on the water, were suddenly convinced they were going to die. That's how fierce this storm was. These men who knew the sea, who had weathered storms before, realized this was no ordinary squall. And in their panic, in their desperation, in their cries for help, they looked over at Jesus. And what was He doing? He was asleep. Now let's be real. Have you ever been in a situation where everything in your life felt like it was falling apart, and you looked to heaven only to feel like God was silent? Have you ever wondered why it seems like He's resting while you're wrestling, like He's sleeping while you're sinking? That's exactly how those disciples felt. The storm was raging, the water was filling the boat, and Jesus was lying there on a cushion. A cushion, they were wide, died in terror, and He was close, died in peace. But don't miss this. He wasn't asleep because He didn't care. He wasn't asleep because He was indifferent. He wasn't asleep because He didn't see. He was asleep because He wasn't shaken by what shook them. The storm that terrified the disciples wasn't strong enough to disturb the Savior, and that's a word for us. What sends us spiraling doesn't send Him scrambling. The winds don't move Him. The waves don't scare Him. The thunder doesn't intimidate Him. He is steady when everything else is unstable. When the disciples finally woke Him up, their words dripped with panic and accusation. "Teacher, don't you care that we're perishing?" They mistook His silence for absence, His rest for neglect. And isn't that just like us sometimes? When the storm rages in our lives, we start to wonder if He even cares. We start to ask if His promises are still true. We start to question if His presence is still with us. We think if He loved me, He wouldn't let me go through this. If He was really here, this storm wouldn't be happening. But the truth is, His love isn't proven by the absence of storms. It's proven by His presence in the midst of them. So Jesus got up, and He didn't grab a bucket to start bailing water. He didn't panic like the disciples. He didn't call for help. He stood in the same storm that terrified them, and with authority in His voice, He spoke to the winds and waves, "Peace, be still." And in an instant, creation had to obey the voice of its Creator. The winds hushed, the waves calmed, and a great stillness settled over that chaotic sea. What had been out of control was now fully under His control. And notice this, the disciples had spent all their energy fighting the storm, but all it took was one word from Jesus to silence it. That's the difference between our effort and His authority. We can strain and struggle and still sink, but when He speaks, everything shifts. He doesn't need hours. He doesn't need strategies. He doesn't need reinforcements. All he needs is a moment to release his word, and the storm has no choice but to bow. The disciples sat there in awe, whispering among themselves, "Who is this, that even the winds and waves obey him?" They had seen him heal bodies, they had seen him feed multitudes, but this storm revealed another dimension of his power. The sea that no man could tame, the winds that no hand could hold, these forces of nature surrendered instantly to his command. And that's the heart of it. Storms don't just test us, they reveal him. They uncover aspects of his authority, his strength, his sovereignty, that we might never recognize in calm waters. Because it's in the storm that we see he's not just the God of healing, not just the God of provision, not just the God of teaching and miracles. He's the God who reigns over nature itself, who holds all creation in his hands, who speaks and the universe obeys. Being steady in the storm doesn't mean the storm disappears. It doesn't mean the winds stop blowing or the waves stop crashing. It doesn't mean the lightning ceases to flash across the sky or the thunder quiets its roar. Sometimes the storm still rages outside, but the difference is it no longer rages inside of you. That's the essence of steadiness, not the removal of the problem, but the presence of peace in the middle of it. Because if peace only comes when everything is calm, that's not peace, that's just relief. Real peace is proven when chaos surrounds you yet doesn't consume you. Real steadiness is when you can stand with waves slapping against your boat, yet you don't crumble. It's when the storm is louder than your thoughts, but your faith speaks louder than your fear. It's when the outside environment is unstable, but your inner spirit refuses to be shaken. That kind of steadiness isn't natural, it's supernatural. Think about a tree in the middle of a storm. Its branches bend, its leaves scatter, the wind pushes it back and forth. To the untrained eye, it looks like it might topple any second. But what keeps that tree standing is not what you see on the surface. It's the roots buried deep in the ground. Roots that you can't see are the very thing that keep the tree from being uprooted. The storm may shake it, but it can't remove it, because what anchors it is hidden beneath. That's the kind of steadiness God calls us to. Not a life free from shaking, but a life so rooted in him that no storm has the power to uproot us. The enemy wants you to believe that the presence of fear means the absence of faith, but that's not true. Faith is not the absence of fear, it's the refusal to let fear dictate your decisions. Faith is standing steady when everything in you wants to run. Faith is lifting your eyes to heaven when the waves are slamming into your chest. Faith is declaring God's promises out loud when your circumstances are screaming the opposite. Fear might knock on the door, but faith decides who gets to live inside. And steadiness means you don't have to match the storm's pace. Storms are frantic, storms are urgent, storms are loud. They move fast, they push hard, they try to pull you into their frenzy. But steadiness says, I don't have to live at the speed of this storm. I can stand in stillness even when everything around me is rushing. Because steadiness is not about controlling the weather. It's about letting God control your heart. We have a choice in every storm. We can either internalize the chaos or anchor ourselves in peace. We can either let the storm outside produce a storm inside, or we can choose to remain calm, anchored, steady, grounded. And the way we choose is not by sheer willpower, but by surrender. Surrendering the fear, surrendering the outcome, surrendering the control we never really had in the first place. That surrender opens the door for his peace to guard our hearts and minds. Remember, the disciples panicked in the boat because the storm around them became the storm within them. The waves outside turned into waves of fear inside, but Jesus was steady. He carried peace so deeply within himself that even the howling winds couldn't disturb it. That's the invitation for us, to live so anchored in him that the external never dictates the internal. The waves may crash, but they don't control you. The winds may howl, but they don't define you. The storm may rage, but it doesn't get to reign over you. Storms are not just obstacles, they are opportunities. They are not simply interruptions to your plans, they are invitations to see God's hand in ways you would have never seen without them. Every storm that crashes into your life has purpose woven into its winds. Sometimes it is sent by God, sometimes it is allowed by God, sometimes it is used by God, but always it is designed to reveal Him in a way you might not have recognized before. When a storm rises, it strips away illusions. It takes what you thought was secure and shows you what was actually fragile. It exposes what you were leaning on that couldn't hold you. Storms uncover false securities, so that when everything else is shaken, the only thing left standing is what's unshakable. And that moment, painful as it is, becomes the very opportunity for God to remind you that He is the anchor who doesn't move. The storm that you thought would destroy you often becomes the stage for His glory. Think of Israel at the Red Sea, the water in front, Pharaoh's army behind, fear pressing from every side. That looked like the end. That looked like destruction, but the storm wasn't an obstacle. It was the platform where God's power would be put on display. The sea that threatened to drown them became the very path that delivered them. That's the kind of reversal only God can orchestrate, and it often happens in storms. When you find yourself in the middle of a storm, it's easy to pray, God, get me out. But sometimes His answer isn't immediate escape. Sometimes His answer is transformation in the middle of it. Because the storm you want Him to remove may be the very storm He is using to refine you. You don't learn endurance in calm waters. You don't discover courage on sunny days. You don't uncover the depth of your faith when everything is predictable and safe. Those things grow in storms. The storm teaches you to pray differently. Suddenly your prayers are not rehearsed lines but desperate cries. Suddenly you lean into Him in a way you didn't when things were easy. The storm awakens dependence. It forces you to remember that you are not in control, that you are not self-sufficient, that you cannot hold everything together on your own. And that awareness is not weakness. It is the soil where strength takes root. Because His strength is made perfect in your weakness, and the storm makes sure you see just how much you need Him. Storms are also opportunities for testimony. When you come through on the other side, when the winds die down and the sun breaks through, you carry a story of God's faithfulness that can't be argued with. People may debate your theology, they may question your perspective, but they cannot deny your testimony. When you say, I've been through the storm and I'm still standing because of Him, your life becomes evidence of His power, and evidence is louder than argument. Even more, storms create opportunities for God to demonstrate that He is not limited by what limits you. You may feel trapped, but He is not trapped. You may feel powerless, but He is not powerless. You may feel surrounded, but He is not surrounded. The storm puts you in the perfect position for Him to show that His authority is greater than the chaos, that His sovereignty is bigger than the circumstances, that His voice still calms what no one else can control. So while storms shake you, they also shape you. While storms break your plans, they also build your faith. While storms strip you of your own strength, they set the stage for His strength to be revealed. What looks like a setback is often a setup. What feels like the enemy's weapon often becomes God's tool. The storm is not the end of the story. It is the chapter where His glory is revealed in a way calm seas could never have shown. Storms don't last forever. They have a beginning, they have a middle, and they have an end. The winds howl, but eventually they weaken. The rain pours, but eventually it passes. The thunder roars, but eventually it fades into silence. No storm in nature has ever raged without ceasing, and the same is true in life. The storm that feels endless right now is not eternal. It may feel unrelenting, but it will not have the final say. That's the truth storms want you to forget. They want you to believe that what you're going through will always be this way. The enemy whispers it will never get better. This is permanent. This is your new reality. But storms are liars. They are temporary intrusions, not permanent definitions. What looks like an unending night is only the prelude to a new dawn. What feels like a never-ending battle is only a season, not your identity. The enemy thrives on convincing you that your present situation is permanent, but God declares that seasons shift, waters recede, and storms subside. And when the storm lifts, you discover that you are not the same as you were before it came. You may walk out of it with scars, but you also walk out with strength. You may carry reminders of the struggle, but you also carry a deeper resilience. Storms don't just pass, they transform, they leave you changed. They stretch your faith, they expand your endurance, they carve into you a depth that calm seas never could. You come out stronger, steadier, more anchored in who God is, because you've seen him in the storm. When the disciples went into the storm, they were terrified, questioning, uncertain. But when they came out, they carried a fresh revelation of who Jesus was. The storm became the classroom, and the lesson was his authority. That's what storms do. They educate us in ways that no sermon, no book, no conversation ever could. They take truth from theory to testimony. They turn what you've heard into what you've lived. After you've walked with him through the storm, no one can convince you otherwise about his faithfulness. And here's the other thing, when storms end, they often reveal blessings you couldn't have seen without them. The floodwaters recede and the ground is more fertile. The winds die down and the air feels clearer. In the same way, spiritual storms blow away what was unnecessary, strip off what was superficial, and leave behind what is stronger and purer. They refine your focus. They remind you what truly matters. They strip away the distractions so you can see the essentials. You realize after the storm that some things you were clinging to were never meant to hold you. You see more clearly that the people, the possessions, the titles, the accolades, those things could not anchor you. And suddenly you're grateful, not just for what you made it through, but for the way the storm rearranged your priorities. What once seemed indispensable now seems small. What once felt fragile now feels unshakable, because you've learned to plant your hope in what cannot be moved. And when others watch you walk out of your storm, they don't just see your survival. They see your testimony. They see that you were hit, but you didn't quit. They see that you were shaken, but not destroyed. They see that the waves rolled, but you still stand, and your life becomes a living witness to the sustaining power of God. You may not even realize it, but people are watching. They're watching how you endure, how you hold on, how you keep standing. And when the storm passes, your story becomes strength for someone else still in the middle of theirs. The end of the storm is not just relief, it's revelation. It's the unveiling of a deeper strength inside you and a greater God around you. It's the realization that what was meant to drown you only drove you deeper into him. It's the awareness that the storm did not define you, but it did develop you. It didn't end you, but it did equip you.